You're back. I'm glad you came back. We're going to continue on in our discussion of secured transactions. I know this material gets a little dry, unless you're a law nerd like me. So to kind of give you a break, I'm going to start this video with another lawyer joke. And it goes like this. What's the difference between a lawyer and a catfish? One's a bottom-dwelling scumsucker and the other's a fish. All right, well, back to secured transactions. And now we're going to get into a few rules that come up with, that only apply in certain circumstances. And we're going to be looking at buyers and some rules about security interest continuing on in collateral. So let's take a look here at protection that we give to buyers. Once a security interest has attached and perfected, it remains with the collateral until the obligation is fulfilled. So here's the situation you get. Let's go back to Bob in Bob's garage, and we'll continue using this because now you're familiar with it, hopefully, if you've watched the other videos in this series. Let's say Bob has equipment. He has the diagnostic machine that he has used as security for a loan from First Bank, and they now have a security interest in that diagnostic machine, his equipment. And so they have filed a financing statement against Bob's garage for all of his equipment now owned and hereafter acquired, and they've perfected their interest. Okay, what if Bob kind of falls on hard times and he needs to start selling off some of his equipment in order to make his payroll and otherwise keep his business afloat? So if he takes his diagnostic machine and he goes to sell it to Frank of Frank's garage, who's looking for one maybe, and he sells it to Frank, maybe for $500. Frank doesn't bother to look in the Secretary of State's UCC filings. He just buys the diagnostic machine and takes it back. If Bob then defaults on his loan to the bank comes looking for all of Bob's equipment to repossess, and they find out that Bob sold the diagnostic machine to Frank. The question is, can the bank repossess that equipment from Frank? And the answer is generally yes, because Frank is not what we call a buyer in the ordinary course of business in that example. He's another business, and his normal operation is not to buy equipment, it's to fix cars. So let's take a look at what the rule we have here for buyers in the ordinary course of business. We give them a little more protection, and we kind of cut off some of these security interests. So normal buyers, is how we think of buyers in the ordinary course, they can take these items, these property items, free and clear. So here's the exception to the rule that generally perfected security interests continue on until the obligation is satisfied. Buyers in the ordinary course of business are those who buy goods from a seller of goods of that type in good faith. You might think customers, right? Consumers are typically what we think of as buyers in the ordinary course of business. So if I operate a retail store and I normally sell, televisions, when a customer comes into my store and buys the television, they're a buyer in the ordinary course of business typically, and they could take it free and clear of any security interest that I might have created or given to one of my creditors in that television. So if I borrowed money from a bank and I gave all of my inventory as security for that loan to the bank, when the customer comes in and buys the TV, they're a buyer in the ordinary course of business, and when they purchase it, they cut off the security interest as to that TV. So the bank, if I go broke now and default, the bank can't follow that transaction, find the buyer in the ordinary course of business, and repossess the TV from that person. Now that's different from my example, because in my example, Frank in Frank's garage is not a buyer in the ordinary course, because my normal business is not to sell equipment for mechanics. My normal business is to fix cars. Let's take a look at what makes someone a BIOC, or a buyer in the ordinary course of business. First of all, what's the big deal? Well, I just told you. The buyer in the ordinary course of business takes the goods free and clear of a perfected security interests. The elements. The buyer must prove the following things. One, the buyer bought the collateral from a merchant of goods of that kind. Right? So you have to show that the seller is normally in the business of buying and selling goods of that type. The buyer purchased it in good faith. In other words, the buyer came through. They weren't trying to maybe cut off someone's security interest. They weren't trying to undercut any kind of creditors or know about its security interest, anything like that, that they're trying to steal the collateral away from or anything. But they're operating in good faith. They're a customer who doesn't know or care about the security interests of their seller, and they're just there with a pure heart and an empty head, is what we call a buyer in the ordinary course of business. And then last, the seller created the security interest. So whoever is the seller, in my example, it would be like Best Buy. They're the retail seller. It's them that created the security interest. They're the ones selling to the customer. Customer's therefore a buyer in the ordinary course of business. Okay, now we're going to put a little bit more of a twist on this, and we're going to go back for a second, and we're going to talk about that rule. I don't know if you remember this from the previous video, but there's a rule that we talked about, the PMSI in consumer goods. If you remember that, you remember what a purchase money security interest, we said, is perfected in consumer goods without filing. Okay, well, what happens if we have a buyer in the ordinary course of business, and we have a buyer, I guess, of consumer goods, and there's nothing to look up, there's no way to know about the security interest. What's the rule there? Well, we're going to find out there's an exception here. The exception that we're going to talk about is to the automatic perfection rules for PMSI and security goods, in consumer goods, right? So again, here's the situation. We have a lender, and they're extending credit to the buyer, who then uses the credit to buy the collateral that they give to the lender. So we have this purchase money security interest. Okay, and let's assume then that the purchase money lender does not file anything because it's consumer goods and they don't have to be perfected. Okay, if a buyer of consumer goods can prove the following things, then he or she will prevail in priority over even a purchase money security interest lender in consumer goods if the following things are proven. First, consumer goods are purchased from a debtor seller. The buyer is not aware, actual notice, of security interests. The buyer purchases it for household use. In other words, it's consumer goods, and it's purchased to be consumer goods, continue to be consumer goods. And the secured party has not filed a financing statement. All right, what are we talking about? Let me give you an example. And the one example that I can think of that really would nail this situation would be like a yard sale. Okay, so let's say that a person goes to Best Buy. Best Buy extends, let's say it's me, I go to Best Buy and they extend me credit, and I use the credit to purchase a television, big screen TV, and it's consumer goods because I'm going to take it home and use it in my house. And so their credit extension is used to purchase the TV, which I then give them a security interest in the TV, right? And I'm going to make payments over time to pay for the TV until it's paid in full. So it's purchase money security interest that I give to Best Buy in consumer goods. Now, they don't file anything with the Secretary of State because they don't have to, right? PMSI in consumer goods is perfected without filing. So I take the TV home and I use it for a while, and then I have a yard sale. And I put the TV out at the yard sale. And a neighbor of mine comes over, has no idea that I haven't finished paying for the TV, that I still owe money to Best Buy, and wants to buy it at the yard sale. And so I give him a fair price on it, and he buys it and takes it home. I then stop making my payments to Best Buy, and I default. And now Best Buy comes to repossess based on their security interest, and they find out that I sold the TV to my neighbor. Can Best Buy go to my neighbor and repossess the TV, and do they get possession of it from my neighbor? And the answer is, assuming that my neighbor fits these elements, no, right? Because he's a buyer of consumer goods. So here's the situation. Let's go back and look at the elements. The consumer goods are purchased from a debtor seller. In my example, I was the debtor, and now I'm the seller at the yard sale. So yes, the goods were purchased from the debtor seller. And the buyer, my neighbor, is not aware of any security interest. I didn't tell my buyer, my neighbor rather, that I had borrowed money that I'm not done paying for it yet. I gave the Best Buy a security interest in my TV. He has no idea. Next, the buyer purchases it for household use. So my neighbor purchases the TV to take to his house to use for normal household purposes. Yes. And last, the secured party did not file a financing statement. In my example, Best Buy didn't file anything because, again, PMSI in consumer goods is perfected without filing. Okay, so in that scenario, if we have these specific elements met, then my neighbor would get to keep the TV, even if I default, even though Best Buy has a perfected security interest in consumer goods. And I have this at the bottom of the slide, this last question. How can the secured party protect themselves from this? Right? I mean, the rule says they don't have to file, right? Because it's consumer goods and there'd be so many of those transactions, we just let them have a perfected security interest as long as they do a PMSI. So how can they ever protect themselves? Well, if Best Buy is really concerned about this, then they could file a financing statement. Even though they don't have to have a perfected interest, a filed finance statement would be good against any subsequent buyer, even at a yard sale, anywhere else. It's public notice and that kind of thing. So if they were really worried about it, they would go ahead and file a financing statement, and they could do that. Normally, we don't do that because, again, this is a pretty narrow situation. It doesn't happen all that often, but that is the rule. Okay, here's another one that gets pretty detailed, and I want you to kind of follow me on this. First of all, we're going to talk about buyers of chattel paper and instruments. And this is not something that a lot of us have, firsthand experience with, unless we work at a bank or a finance company or something like that. But a buyer of chattel paper in the ordinary course of business. Okay, let's back up and talk about what chattel paper is. Chattel paper is a consumer sale on credit. So again, back to Best Buy, right? Best Buy sells their televisions or big screen TVs, and a lot of their customers, their buyers, don't have cash. So they agree to make payments in installments over time. And they sign an agreement that says so, and in the agreement it also has a security agreement where they give Best Buy a security interest in the TV. Okay, the document that the consumer signs contracting to make these installment payments over time, that document is called chattel paper. It's a stream of payments, right, from the consumer to the seller, like from the buyer to Best Buy. And maybe over 2 years, there's going to be this stream of monthly payments that come in. So the document that sets that out is called chattel paper. Now, Best Buy can take that chattel paper and they can sell it. Remember a couple chapters ago or several chapters ago, we talked about assignments, where you can always assign your rights. And we talked about assigning your rights in a contract to receive payments over time. And you can do that, and there are businesses out there who, in their ordinary course of business, are out there buying up chattel paper. Mostly finance companies and banks and those kinds of things. So let's say Best Buy gets chattel paper from a buyer. They sell a TV, and in return, they don't take cash, but they take an installment sale contract, chattel paper. Then local finance company comes to Best Buy and says, hey, we'll pay you a certain amount of money for all of your chattel paper so that you guys, Best Buy, don't have to collect it. We'll do that part for you. You can take the risk out. We'll just pay you money right now, and then we'll take on the risk of having to collect it. And Best Buy says, yeah, that's great. So they sell it. And they sell all their chattel paper in the ordinary course of business, because that's what the finance company does, to the finance company. Okay, so that's the scenario. Let's look at the rule. The rule says a buyer of chattel paper in the ordinary course of business takes free of a prior security interest if he or she takes possession of the chattel paper. Now, in this case, we're talking about physical contracts, actual paper that you can take possession of. There's another way to do this, which is not by taking possession, but by taking control. If it's an electronic chattel paper, right? If it's just a computer file or agreement that's in electronic form, well, obviously you're not going to take possession of that, but you can take control of it, right? And control, of course, would be, in my example, Best Buy giving the finance company control over that chattel paper. Either way, the key to this is that the buyer of chattel paper in the ordinary course of business can take the chattel paper free and clear of even Best Buy's prior security interest by another creditor, right? And I've got their chattel paper as a record of an installment sale of consumer goods, and that's what we're talking about. It's kind of funny for us to be talking about the sale of property, the installment sale of property, being property. And so that's what makes this a little confusing. And one example on this that hopefully will kind of clear it up, because this is the way it comes up, and this is how it comes into question from time to time. Let's go back to our parties. Let's have Best Buy, and let's say Bank One loans Best Buy money. And in exchange, Best Buy gives Bank One a security interest in all of its equipment and all of its inventory, now owned and hereafter acquired. And remember that when one party gives another a security interest, that automatically included with the security interest is an interest in proceeds. So when Best Buy gives Bank One an interest in inventory, it also includes automatically, unless it says otherwise, an interest in the proceeds of that inventory. Okay, so Best Buy does that. Bank One is perfected in equipment and inventory. Best Buy then takes part of its inventory, televisions, and they sell them to consumers on credit. And they take in return not money, not cash, but chattel paper, installment sale. Okay, so Best Buy is now sitting there with these contracts, it's chattel paper. Finance company comes along and wants to buy it in their ordinary course of business, and Best Buy says yes, so they sell the chattel paper. Best Buy then goes broke, and they default to Bank One. Bank One comes in looking to repossess all of the collateral, all the equipment, and all the inventory, and all the proceeds from the inventory. Now, Best Buy, like I mentioned, they don't have cash as proceeds for the sale of the big screen TVs, but they do have chattel paper. So under its security interest, Bank One is looking to repossess the chattel paper as proceeds of inventory. And they normally would be allowed to do this. But Best Buy says, well, we don't have that anymore. We sold it to finance company. Your fight is with them. And then the question is, can Bank One repossess the chattel paper away from finance company? Who gets it? And under our rule here, if the chattel paper was purchased in the ordinary course of business, that buyer, finance company, takes it free and clear, even over a prior perfected security interest. Okay, one more issue here with security interests and interests in property, and we're going to talk just very briefly about liens. Right? A lien is a security interest created not by agreement with the debtor, but by law, usually by statute. Sometimes the law just says, well, when certain people do work on personal property, then we're just going to allow them to have an automatic lien against that personal property, or an interest, a security interest in that personal property. And I've got some examples here that you might be familiar with. A mechanic's lien, an artisan's lien, a harvester's lien. Those are just examples of different statutory liens that are out there. By the way, so as not to get confused, a mechanic's lien, whenever you see that, doesn't apply to like an auto mechanic. This is an old term, and it actually applies to people who do improvements to real property. So people who do carpenters, people that do work on houses and other buildings on real property, they automatically have a lien in the amount of their work over the improvements on the property through a mechanic's lien, right? And that's by statute. Also, an artisan's lien. Artisan's lien is where you would have an auto mechanic. An artisan is under the statute someone who does work or fixes personal property belonging to another. So this is what allows a local auto mechanic, if you take your car in to have some repairs and they do the repairs and you don't pay them, the mechanic can keep possession of the car, not give it back to you until you pay, and if you never pay, they could follow the statutory procedure. They could sell the car, take the proceeds to pay off your bill. Right? That's because there's an artisan's lien by statute that allows them to do that. And a harvester's lien deals with people who harvest crops for someone else. Same thing. They get paid for their work. Statutory liens. Here's the big deal with liens and statutory liens, like mechanics liens and artisans liens and those things. Statutory liens generally take priority over Article 9 security interest, but it depends on the nature of the lien. But usually what it means is, if I have an artisan's lien against a vehicle of yours, then my lien takes priority over even your bank if they have a security interest in your vehicle and they have possession, for instance, of the certificate of title and have perfected under Article 9, I still get to jump ahead of them by statute, by law. And I don't know if you can see this over on the slide there, but this is actually a picture that I took myself, my cell phone, and it's hard to read, but it's basically a notice that I saw posted in it was a gas station and auto mechanic place over in eastern Illinois somewhere. It was a small town, and I just thought this was funny, and I'm a big enough secure transactions nerd that I took a picture of it and put it on the slide for you. But it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about, because he has a notice, and it says vehicles left after 30 days will be charged $20 a day. Vehicle or parts left after 90 days will be sold, right, and on and on. And really what he's saying is, I have a lien. If I do work on your car and you don't pay me, eventually I can sell it and satisfy your bill.